Awesome. Thank you all for being here. So again, good afternoon and welcome to a conversation between pro-choice women who converted to Catholicism. A 1 hour long webinar where we'll hear the stories of 3 women who are pro-choice and were not born and raised Catholic, but rather made the conscious decision to convert later in their lives. Catholicism has a singular understanding of humanity's relationship with God and nature. For Catholics, grace perfects nature, meaning that all human beings are in a dynamic, co-creative relationship with God, and that all finite things in creation are capable of revealing truths about the eternal. Many are called to the Catholic faith because they know this to be true. We know that each person has a unique relationship with faith and religion. Some are born into a faith and reaffirm these beliefs throughout their entire lives, but others experience a more complex and nuanced journey to find God. Michelle, Judi, and Mary are here today to tell us about their unique journeys with faith and their experiences as proudly pro-choice women who chose to become Catholic because they care deeply about social justice. They'll tell us a bit about who they are and what called them to the Catholic faith, what their experiences were while converting as pro-choice women, and what their relationships with God and Catholicism have been like since. But before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Marley Breakstone. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the State Policy Associate at Catholics for Choice. I have the honor of working on outreach, recruitment, and engagement of our activist network here at CFC, building relationships with folks like these women that you see here before you today. I also work with partner organizations, coalitions, and Catholic state legislators around the country to fight for policies that protect reproductive freedom and protect each person's ability to make their own conscience-based decisions. Now, let's very quickly go over some general logistics and housekeeping rules. Since this is a webinar, you'll be able to chat, or you won't be able to chat the general audience. Show yourselves on camera or unmute your microphones, but keep in mind there will be a Q&A at the end, so you'll have an opportunity to ask all the questions that you may be thinking. You can submit these questions via the Q&A function on Zoom that'll show up at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. This webinar will also be recorded and sent out to registrants in the coming days. It'll also be available on our YouTube page should you want to revisit it or share it with a friend or family member. The hope is that by viewing this webinar and hearing these women's stories, those with similar views and experiences will feel less alone when grappling with who they are, what values they hold, and what faith is right for them. All right, so let's dive right in to this important conversation. And to start off, why don't you each tell me briefly who you are, where you're from, and what your relationship with faith was like during your childhood and upbringing. Michelle, why don't you go first?
Good afternoon, everyone. Marley, thanks so much for inviting us all to participate, and I'm thrilled to be here with my CFC friends, Mary and Judi. My name's Michelle. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio originally. I've lived around the Midwest. I'm currently coming to you from Detroit. So growing up, I really didn't have a lot of religion in my first 10 years. I will say that my father's family is very Catholic. So I have an aunt who's a nun. I had a great uncle and a great aunt who were a priest and a nun. I would occasionally attend church with my grandmother. I have very positive memories of that as a young girl. But I also had a grandfather who wouldn't let my mother in the house for the first 4 or 5 years I was alive because my parents weren't married in the Catholic Church. So there's some baggage there. So Fast forward, I actually, my parents were divorced, which again, even though they weren't married in the Catholic Church, had some baggage with it because my father wanted to get remarried. So they had to annul that marriage. And again, as a young girl, not understanding why this is so horrible. So my mother, when I was probably in about 6th or 7th grade, my mother and I started going to the United Church of Christ, which is an awesome, open, welcoming faith community. I went through confirmation. And then from about 18 onward till I converted, I was about 46 when I converted. So from like 18 to 46, I would say agnostic. I didn't like organized religion. I didn't like the dictates. I was very active in the women's community, and it just never sat right with me. I ended up married. My husband is Catholic, but he is a casual participant in the faith. And so I ended up coming back around, and it was in 2017-18 that I made the decision to convert. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Now, Mary, can you please introduce yourself and let us know where you're from and what your relationship with faith was like before you became Catholic?
Well, my name is Mary. I also live in the Midwest. I am from the Midwest, but I've lived in the East, but I live in Kansas right now. I grew up Lutheran, which is not that different from Catholicism, except that it is extremely conservative. Went to church absolutely every Sunday, every Wednesday night during Lent. I went to a parochial school until I was in 9th grade. And I love God, and it was part of my life. But Vietnam was going on, and poverty everywhere. And I looked around me and it didn't seem right. And when you listen at church and hear what they're saying, but then the world around you is not that way, you kind of question. And so throughout high school, I still went to church. I will admit, I left Nebraska a week after I graduated from high school, and ended up in New Jersey, which kind of shocking, but I still believed in God, but kind of like Michelle, I was kind of like agnostic. I didn't like the organized religion. I didn't want people telling me what to do because I saw all this stuff. But at the same point, you hear about the Berrigans and all about the Catholic Church is out there, and all these, I went to all these anti-war demonstrations, and there were nuns and priests and people I felt that maybe I could relate to. Okay, that was fine. And then I'll be real honest. My husband was a transfer student into Rutgers, where we went to school. And he asked me a question and we became friends. And then he told me he wanted to be a priest. And I didn't understand it. It made no sense to me. This is an extremely progressive man. Why would he want to be a priest? So he's like, well, you believe in God. Why don't you go to Mass? And I went to Mass, and it wasn't that different than my Lutheran faith, but I knew it was so much more progressive. And I just felt that, oh my God, it was at home. And then I learned about liberation theology. And it's like, oh my God, this is what I want. This is my life, because everything to me has been about rich and poor and things that are not equal, and class struggle, and women are, I'll talk more about, I am extremely pro-choice for various reasons. And I don't know if we want to get into those, but I'm extremely pro-choice and extremely pro-woman, and fought for everything for my entire life and always will. That's it. Still go to church when I can. Still have problems with organized religion. But you know what? The Catholic Church is vibrant. We have an incredible Pope who is committed to social justice. And as Catholics, we're called to that, and we have to be. And I'm not talking about as Catholic hierarchy or priest or a church. I'm talking about us as Catholic women and Catholic men. We have to get out there and make sure that we follow the law of God. That's it.
Amen. Thank you, Mary. And now, last but not least, Judi, Can you share who you are, where you're from, and what your relationship was with faith while you were growing up?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marley, for inviting me in this very important discussion. I am also like Mary, I'm from the Midwest. I grew up during the 50s, and my parents were divorced. And so as a kid growing up in the 50s, I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb because all my friends, all my family, everybody came from that Leave It to Beaver kind of house. And as I said, my mom was a single mom, so she had to work. And in a way, I was kind of brought up like a foster kid because I had to go to a lot of different babysitters and I would stay with them for long periods of time. And as a result, though, of that, I was exposed to a diverse population of different cultures, different churches, and I went to many of these different churches. And as a child, I remember going to a mass one time with one of my favorite babysitters, and all I can tell you is that it was an emotional drawing. I've just felt so emotionally drawn to the mass to this day. I think the mass is just absolutely beautiful. There's something about it emotionally that draws me in. When I was probably about 8 years old or so, we got, like Mary too, we got involved in, my mom and I got involved in a Lutheran church, and I went through the Lutheran church, I don't know, probably until after my first marriage. Well, I had my children baptized in the Lutheran church. I had a lot of resentments towards the Lutheran church because the one I went to, just the juniors, the teenagers in that church really bullied me and made fun of me a lot. So I was very reluctant to go to the church, but I did out of a sense of duty. And like Mary said, there's not a big difference between Lutheran and Catholic as far as the overall service goes, but it never moved me to the degree that the Mass did. So unfortunately, the man I chose to marry was an alcoholic. And as a result of that, he would go in and out of AA, and I was in Al-Anon for probably 13 years. And I started going to these retreats in Warrenville, Illinois, and it was a retreat house run by Catholic nuns and Catholic priests. And well, the Catholic priests would come in and do the retreats for the weekend. I don't know if I'm getting this right, but I believe they were Franciscan, because I hear all the time of how there's a difference in the Franciscans and other parts of the Catholic Church. At any rate, I probably went on these retreats 3 times a year. And when you go, you get your own sister assigned to you. And so I was able to talk to my sister all the time. And once again, I just felt this incredible love, this incredible acceptance, this incredible compassion, And I started talking to my sister about how I thought I really would like to become a Catholic. I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, "Well, that's wonderful. We'd be happy to have you. But just remember, Judy, that the Catholicism that you're seeing here is not really what you're going to see out in the world. It's vastly different." And I think that's because, they were dealing with people in recovery. They were dealing with the other side of, what's not really, at that time, wasn't so accepted in society. So from that point on, I just went to so many different churches. I like to call it church shopping. And I was involved in many, many different types of churches. I never went to a synagogue, but I was in many different types of churches. I was baptized 3 times trying to get it right, And like Mary said, I've always loved God. I've always felt this. There's never been a time in my life where I didn't believe in God. So eventually, I think I was like, maybe it was you, Michelle, that said this. It was in my 40s. And I made the decision to become a Catholic. And at that time, people have said to me also, it was during Easter, they rushed me through that 6 weeks. I don't think I even had 6 weeks. I think I had 3 weeks. The subject of abortion was never raised. a lot of things were never raised. And I don't know what the reason was for kind of rushing me through, maybe because it was close to Easter and they like to, you know, have this ceremony on the night before Easter Sunday. And at any rate, I became a Catholic, and it was interesting because my mom, who was a staunch Lutheran, she actually came, which was pretty cool. And she got me a rosary, which was also pretty cool. And my parents were divorced, like I said. My mom was Lutheran. My dad was Catholic, like you said, Michelle. And it was interesting because my mom won the argument about how to name me. And my dad, or no, she won the war about who was going, how I was going to be baptized. And my dad won the war about he was going to name me. And as I got closer and closer to my dad, I would go to mass with him. And I think that was another component of wanting to become a Catholic, because I was emotionally closer to my dad than I was my mom. So did you want me to talk about what happened in church right now, Marley? Or you want me to wait on that?
No, we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm excited for that
So
story.
basically, yeah, that's okay. So basically, that's how I became a Catholic.
Awesome. Thank you. That's such an
You're welcome.
interesting story, especially talking about how your family reacted and supported you through the process, and talked to you about your choice to convert as well. So going off of that, Mary and Michelle, can you talk a little bit about your conversion process, how outspoken you were about your pro-choice views during this, and what type of support or lack thereof you got from those around you during that process?
Sure, I'll go first. I just wanted to say that also my parents were divorced, like Judy's, when no one got divorced, and I felt the same discrimination she did, you know, in the Lutheran Church. That's very important. When I converted, the process, it was not organized. I did not convert until after I got married. And it was a Franciscan priest, my husband's hometown, actually the church we got married in, and I just went in and talked to him. And since I had been Lutheran, he didn't have to explain a lot of stuff to me, and he never brought up the entire issue of being pro-choice, pro-life, whatever. But the interesting thing was, at that point, when I got married in 1976, was the first year pre-Cana classes were introduced. And my husband and I, as I said, we went to Rutgers, and the only pre-Cana class we could get to was in Princeton. So we would take the train to Princeton, and the priest that ran the program, we had to go once a week for 4 weeks. When we got to the whole abortion issue, now granted, this is 76 and Roe v. Wade was 73, right? Okay, so we're only 3 years in. And he did not answer the question. He said, I'm only going to tell you that you know how many children you can afford to have. That is it. End of discussion. If you have any other discussions, talk to your own parish priest. And I, being the smart woman I am, said, well, that just fits right into everything I believe in, you know? And I was just like, I was ecstatic, you know, that I'm not going to have somebody, because the thing I got from people at school was, oh, the church, they're going to tell you that you have to have you can't use birth control, you can't do this, you can't do that. No. I will tell you about my family, who had been very anti-Catholic, because I have an aunt who married a Catholic in 1954 or 1953. It was before I was born, because I was born in 54. And part of her family would not go to the wedding of our family. So, but by the time I converted, my grandmother, thank God that I believed in God and thought that was the best thing in the world. And as long as we go to church, it makes no difference. And I will tell you, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, they would all go to mass. My sister and I live in the same town, and every time my sister's gone to church, she's gone to a Catholic church with us. She's never converted. My granddaughter has asked her many times too, but she's like, no, it's okay. I know what I believe in. And she's not gone to a Lutheran church. So that's my family supported me. They still do. It was I want to make this clear to people. I did not convert because I got married. I converted because of my belief.
Thank you.
And that's it. Okay.
Absolutely. It's that belief in social justice that called you, and that's so
Absolutely.
powerful.
Absolutely.
Michelle, can you answer the same questions and talk a little bit about your process of conversion and what type of support or lack thereof you experienced during that?
Yeah, so my path is a little bit different than Mary and Judy's. So in 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and I went through all of the treatments. I got the full cocktail of treatments over 18 months. And during that time, we were living in Cincinnati, and my husband has always been, as like the primary Catholic in our little marriage, he was always drawn to the Jesuits as a more understanding, learned scholar kind of Catholic group. And so we've had a Jesuit parish in Cincinnati that we would go to on occasion. I think he was probably going a little more than I knew when I was in treatment. And as I had mentioned, as an older adult, when I would go with my husband, I often had really good thoughts of my grandmother. And so, as Judi mentioned, I also love the ritual of the service of the Catholic Church. So I had finished all my treatment, and we were living in Cincinnati, and I was starting to like live, what is life after you're not going to doctor's appointments every month. And decided to go to a mass on a Sunday. It was in the summer, and they made an announcement about the RCIA class. And after church, I looked at my husband and I said, I'm going to do that. And he was like, what? And he's like, why? And I said, I don't know. I just need to do it. And so I made an appointment with the priest who was running the program, Father Matt. And so I take my lunch break, and it was an August afternoon. I march into the office, and my husband, before this meeting, he's like, are you going to tell him you're active in Planned Parenthood? And like, are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, yeah, I need to do it. And so I march into the church office, and I meet with Father Matt, and we talked for about an hour. And that was really the transformational moment when I knew that I could figure this crazy idea out. Because if you had asked my friends and family, I was like the least likely to become Catholic in my group. So I told Father Matt at the top of the meeting, like I introduced myself, I tell him I'm in Planned Parenthood, and like the code word, like and we have this conversation, and I remember him saying, well, I can't tell you that's okay. But then that was the end of the conversation. So, I mean, he obviously knew what we were saying. And so we had a very nice conversation. And so I knew going into that conversation with Father Matt that I would either leave that meeting and I would continue on I'm going to do this RCIA thing, or Father Matt would say something and I'd be like, yep, nope, still don't like the Catholic Church. So I had a really good discussion with Father Matt, and I signed up for our RCIA. I had a friend who was Catholic, and she was my kind of mentor through the process. And so kind of the next group of people I told at the time, so Planned Parenthood of Greater Cincinnati has a really active group of young women, and I was involved in this group. And so we were getting ready to have a meeting. And so I go to the meeting, I'm like, I have something to share with everyone. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I'm going to become Catholic. They're all like, what? After their first reaction of like, what? I can honestly say that they were all like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'm, if you think you can do that. So it was actually interesting because we had a little conversation, and one of our members is an active Quaker. And so she and I kind of talked about like faith in God. And I don't know, it was kind of this interesting thing. So I still don't really understand it fully. I just the Holy Spirit spoke to me, and I have to tell you, like, I still feel like so ridiculous saying that, but that is literally what happened.
Mhm.
So I went through the RCIA. I became Catholic. As far as my family, like my aunt, who's a former nun, she was totally excited for me. Brian's family, who are all Catholic, were totally excited for me. And I told my mom, the UCC mom, and she's like, "Why would you do that?" And then she's like, "Well, I'm really happy you're going to church." She said, "That's great." She goes, "But the UCC, we're much more understanding." She's like, "Don't you want to like join the UCC?" And I was like, well, that would be the easier choice, right? Like it would have been so much easier to just go to the UCC. But I just wasn't what I was called to do. And so I became Catholic. I'm still, so as I said, I joined the church on Easter of 2018. So I'm still a very new Catholic. I'm still learning a lot. But I have found, and particularly during the pandemic, just a great source of peace. And God has really helped me in these last few years. I'm still learning so much. I still don't really like the hierarchy of the church, so I tend to gravitate towards the sisters. So for example, on Facebook, I
Excellent.
recently joined, there's a group, I wrote it down, the Women's Ordination Conference. I'm a big follower of Sister Joan Chittister, so I kind of like, and actually on Friday, I did tune in to the service from the Vatican with the Pope. And so of course I really love Pope Francis, but I know he's not going to be around forever. So I'm sticking with the sisters. I feel like the sisters know what's going on. Of course, not all of them, but so that's a little bit about my story. I still some days don't understand it, but I just like going to church, and God is a great source of comfort to me. So I think the most important thing is, as a Catholic, is I have tried to seek out people like CFC and others who I know recognize that the hierarchy of the church, that there has been change over the millennia in the church, and that to say that church doctrine or church practice can't change is kind of ridiculous. So maybe slow, but I have on my faith journey, I don't talk about my religion a lot. It hasn't come up where I've been in church and objected to something or brought up the abortion question or anything. So I guess in some ways I'm more of a quiet Catholic, but I just seek my people within the community, and CFC has been really instrumental in helping me to connect to some of those folks. So that's my story.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. It's amazing how your journeys are all so unique and took place at different points in your lives and involved different backgrounds and different interactions with those who led you through it, but you all wound up in the same place as part of this awesome community and are here today sharing those stories. And I just think it's really powerful that so many different journeys can kind of lead to the same social justice based actions and communities. So I'm really grateful again that you're here and sharing your stories. So Michelle, I know that you just said that you've never had an experience of disagreeing with something, with a homily or something that was preached from the pulpit in church about abortion.
Well, not that I've spoken up.
That you've spoken up, yes, of course. But I know that Judi has a different story in which she has spoken up about something that she disagreed with. And I know that there are folks on this webinar who could definitely identify with the feeling upset and find themselves somewhere on that spectrum between the Michelles who definitely feel a lot of things but are able to keep to themselves a little bit, and the Judis who's about to tell an awesome story. And yeah, can you please share, Judi?
Sure. Before I go into the story, I did want to add one thing, is that when I was going to these retreats, maybe like Michelle said, maybe they were Jesuits. I never got so into, the history of the church and the different like sects. I don't know if you'd call them sects, but anyway, there was a priest who said to me, he said, Judi, always remember that your conscience is your ultimate authority. And, that really stuck with me. And I really never heard that said before. And I never heard it said since until I got involved with Catholics for Choice, because I heard a lot of that through Catholics for Choice. Okay, so I went to Mass during the 2016 election year. It was maybe, I think, the Sunday before Election Day. And the priest decided that he was going to use the entire homily for politics. And he had a screen that came down from the ceiling, and he showed pictures of Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Mother Teresa. And so he was talking about the election and how vitally important it was, and how as a Catholic, you really had only one choice in how to vote. I could feel myself getting angry. I could feel myself just really bristling over this. So he went on to tell the story. I don't know, to this day, I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, you would think that the priest isn't making it up, but maybe he was given false information. I don't know. But the story he told was that Mother Teresa visited the White House when Hillary Clinton was the first lady. And they had a conversation, and the conversation went like this. Hillary Clinton asked Mother Teresa, do you have any idea why we've never had a woman president? And supposedly, Mother Teresa said, because we killed her. That was just, you're going to bring out the big guns and you're going to bring out Mother Teresa, and I got up and I stood there for a minute, and I thought about saying something, and I thought, no, you know what? I'm just going to leave. And I left, and I never went back to that church except for, I think I went one time for Christmas. And I went to different Catholic churches, and I still have a really hard time, going to that particular church because of that particular priest. I went to other Catholic churches that politics were never brought up. But I was so enraged, I was so angry about that experience that I went home and I started Googling. And because of Googling, I found Catholics for Choice, which is, a blessing in disguise. So, yeah, so that's my story. Today, I really can't say that I go to church. Part of that was because of the pandemic. What I do know is that nobody can take away my faith. Nobody can take away my relationship with Jesus. And that's what's, fundamentally the most important thing, is that my relationship with Jesus. I had an incident about a week ago where somebody was evangelizing to me. And I simply said, because I heard that this is a good response, I simply said, I see it differently. And she said, well, you can see it differently all you want, but that's not what the Bible said. So I just said, okay, well, all right, you believe what you believe, and I believe what I believe. So that was my experience.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so powerful to hear you say that no one can take your faith away from you. And that's something that I hear so often from people who disagree with the dictates of the Vatican or the bishops, and similarly to Michelle, find their own communities of support within the Catholic Church. I think that resonates with almost everyone who considers themselves Catholic, because there's a lot of judgment and shame that comes from the hierarchy on what kind of Catholic you are and how you celebrate your faith. But I find it really inspiring and powerful to hear you all talk about how personally important and integral to your identity your faith is, even though you all experience it differently.
Can I say something about politics and church?
Yes, please do.
Okay, well, my husband and I were lay missionaries with Maryknoll. I don't know if, I'm sure you've heard of Maryknoll. Other people who converted later, maybe not. Maryknoll is the United States Foreign Mission Society. It's out of Austin, New York, and they were the first group to take lay people. So my husband and I, and both of our children who were babies, they were like 1 and 2, were sent to formation. And believe it or not, Archbishop Romero was supposed to come to talk to us. And then there was another coup in Salvador. So he didn't, but we were in Guatemala when Archbishop Romero was assassinated. Now, I don't know if anybody, he's a saint now. He, as I'm sure everyone who's Catholic knows, he was shot and murdered on the altar during communion. He spoke out every Sunday about what was going on in his country. And he listed the names of the people that were being murdered and tortured and disappeared. And he ordered the people to stop it. So it is possible for priests to do that. There were in Guatemala where we were, they had to shut down an entire diocese because too many priests were being murdered. But then we come back to the United States, and I felt very good about my little church here in suburban Kansas City when the priest was talking about the Palestinians and a massacre that had taken place in Lebanon, and he was against it. And then for some reason, all of a sudden, the only political thing you can say from the pulpit has to do with something with elections or abortion. You know, and I have talked to somebody, that is not politics. Politics is the entire world. Come on. Anyway, that's my soapbox. And you ladies know that I like social justice. It's very important, and it's not ending. We must fight.
Absolutely. So what would you say, and any of you can answer this, to people who say that you can't be pro-choice and Catholic, and how are you proving them wrong?
I say anybody can be pro-choice because it's my body, my choice. It's your body, your choice. God gave us that right. And it is our, as Judi said and was taught, it's our conscience that has to guide us. And I was taught the very same thing. So yes, be pro-choice, be Catholic, and be proud of it. I talk to everyone I see about being pro-choice because we all know we're under attack by being pro-choice. And I'm in a state that has an amendment coming up. And I just don't say I'm pro-choice. I say I am Catholic, and I am proudly pro-choice. And the majority of women in the Catholic Church and men are also pro-choice because it's our body. And in this day and age, we should realize what autonomy means to us, bodily autonomy means.
Can I say something? I try to really stress whenever this subject comes up and I'm talking to people about it, I try to really stress that, you know, being pro-choice doesn't mean necessarily that you're pro-abortion. And let me explain that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have wanted to get an abortion. I wouldn't have wanted my children to get one or my granddaughters to get one, but I wouldn't have ever interfered with their choice, you know. As Mary was saying, you know, it's, you know, the same people that didn't want to wear a mask, that didn't want to get vaccinated, you know, are the same people that want to take away the right of a woman to have her own choice, you know. And I just try to stress that to people, that being pro-choice doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we're all pro-life. I don't care who you are, we're all pro-life. And, you know, again, the argument of, you know, yes, it's great for a baby to be born, but what happens afterwards? You know, are these babies being taken care of? Is there funding available? You know, we all know the arguments to that. So.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really about following my conscience. And when I As I said, I still consider myself a new Catholic. I still feel like I have so much to learn, and new in my relationship with God and practicing praying and like all of those things. And I just don't see God
Right.
as a punitive higher God being. And Marley, one of the questions you had asked us is, what values do you associate with Catholicism? And I wrote down compassion, love, and social justice. And for me, I think that each individual's relationship with their God and how they live that day to day and how they treat people day to day is so important. And that is kind of what I value. And I do go to church regularly. And like I said, I even tuned in to the Pope on Friday. I like it. See, it
I
still
did
totally
too.
surprises me sometimes, but I'm just like, I am called to do these things. And I just feel that God is not that punitive. When you see people screaming at people, I've been a clinic escort. When you see people screaming at people in the name of their God, whoever their God is, I
Mhm.
just that's just I just can't fathom that is um what God calls us to, it to be that horrible to other people who are in need. And when people are making healthcare decisions, they're really hard, and I don't think it's anyone's place. I think people should be supportive and try to make the best decisions they can. So for me, it kind of comes back to that, listening to your conscience. And again, I don't, people in the hierarchy who say that we can't change church doctrine or this is how it's been for 1,000 years or whatever. I just don't buy that. And so, I I've always been a joiner, but I feel like whenever I join something, I never fully 100% buy into everything. So I guess that's me in Catholicism again. I'm renewed and refreshed when I go to church. But again, I go to a Jesuit parish here in downtown Detroit, and they're very welcoming. They had the rainbow ribbon pins on the table. So I'm like, there are little ways that they signal that it is a
Right.
welcoming community. And so again, it's about finding your people, finding your tribe within the larger Catholic Church. I'm sorry, I feel like I got off topic. Was that the question?
Mm-mm.
No, not that was great. And leads perfectly into the next point I was going to ask y'all about, which is, in your opinion as a Catholic, do you think that there's room in Catholic theology to question and disagree with church teachings? And do you think that most Catholics experience this at some point or another?
I think there should. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Judy. No, you
I
go,
think that
Judy.
thank you, Mary. I think that there should be, in my specific area. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that there should be. I think that if there was more of that, I think the church would be healthier. The church that experience happened to me is very dogmatic. They're right, and that's all there is to it. And it's not open to any kind of a discussion. But I think that there are plenty of Catholics that feel like we do. Okay, I'm done.
That's okay. I think that the church can always change, because if you look at the 60s and Vatican II, and then you look at the conference in Medellin, Colombia, and liberation theology and what came out of there, and the whole thing with the social justice thing, that we have to be with the poor. We have that back again now with Pope Francis. I mean, that is so incredibly important. And yes, it can change, but it might take a long time,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you who's going to change it. It's going to be the nuns. I mean, I totally agree with that. I have known the most incredible sisters, especially Mary and all sisters that, I mean, they, excuse me, I would never want to cross one of those in a back alley sometime. Let me tell you, those women are phenomenal. And I think it can, but I think our problem is in the United States is that, as they say, we're cafeteria Catholics, but not, but not only are we cafeteria Catholics, I don't think people are thinking. I think we're so used to the being inundated on everything, whether it be television, social media, or whatever, of what a Catholic should be. And excuse me, the television station, the Catholic television station, if you would watch it, would make you want to just put your foot through the TV, which we do periodically. That's not the church. That is not the church. The thing that we have to get American Catholics to realize is that we are the church and we can make the changes. You know, the whole thing for women's ordination, it went on from the 70s. I was part of that back in the 70s. And you know what? It will continue. And it's a long struggle. But you know what? Progress, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, you just have to keep on struggling.
Marley, sorry to interrupt. I just noticed a question in the chat that I think is a really, really important topic for us pro-choice Catholics. Someone is bringing up the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare. And I don't, it's been a little while, when I was in Cincinnati with my Planned Parenthood group, this was something we started talking about is Catholic run hospitals. And I don't have a lot to say other than thank you, person who shared that comment and the link. And that this is a huge issue coming forth. I mean, we all know that Roe is under attack and it's basically going away. But you know, there's the other side has been so insidious over the last 30 years to chip away at every little area. And this issue of Catholic healthcare is huge. And I don't think a lot of women, I don't think people who need healthcare, which is everyone, really fully understand the dynamics and the impact that issues around Catholic healthcare have, particularly with hospital mergers. It was a very big deal in Cincinnati, which tends to be, Cincinnati, Ohio tends to be a more conservative community. And you know, limited, it's a smaller mid-sized tier city, so not as many healthcare options, but I haven't done a lot of reading of it of recent, but I just want to say this is a huge, huge issue that I think as a choice community, we need to be doing more organizing around. And Marley, I'll toss it back to you because you probably have something to say on that topic.
No, that is great. And I was just going to say that what makes a difference and what you've all been saying and highlighting is people like you who are Catholic and can metaphorically use their voices and stand up and say, I am Catholic and this is what I believe and no one can tell me otherwise, is just so incredible. So hearing you as a Catholic speaking out in support of comprehensive healthcare access in every community is amazing. And so powerful. And it reminds me of what you were talking about, Mary, before about your involvement in speaking out against the ballot amendment that's going on in Kansas. Michelle, you were just saying that Roe is under attack, and knowing that in Kansas right now, they're up against a ballot amendment that will be voted on this summer on the ballot that would ban abortion in the state. Which all of it, which coming up on the Supreme Court decisions this summer can and will be devastating if that passes. So I was chatting with Mary a bit a few years ago when the same bill was being heard in the Kansas legislature. Mary actually went to the state house and delivered testimony as a pro-choice Catholic, and alongside other people of faith really fought misconceptions about what people of faith believe and want to see in the policies that are put before them. And every action like this, big or small, is just so powerful. So thank you all for your words and your stories today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one more question, considering what we were just talking about, and any of you can answer this again, but as a Catholic, why do you support policies that favor access to the full range of reproductive health options, including contraception and abortion? Why is that important to you as a Catholic woman?
I'll just say that it's, again, it goes back to the ultimate authority is your conscience. And I think that's, for me, that's the Holy Spirit. I think that, God gave us that gift for a reason. For a woman to have to choose to have an abortion is not something that comes easy. It's not like, oh, I think I'll have steak instead of fish today. It's a very complicated decision. It's a heart-wrenching decision. And, rather than persecuting a woman, some of the legislations that's coming down the pike now is, they're gonna really persecute the woman. They're gonna persecute anybody that's had anything to do with helping her. It's just really, really wrong. And I agree with you, Michelle. That's not the God of my understanding. That is just not the God of my understanding. And so that's how I feel.
Awesome.
My thing is, it is conscience. I agree with Judi. I mean, it is your right. It's your human right given to you by God to follow your conscience, which is the same thing that we always say if you're, or people that believe like we do, if you're going to war, you have to follow your conscience, period. Otherwise, why did they have the Nuremberg trials? Follow your conscience. If you know in your heart what your relationship to God is, it's fine. And I can't see anyone because I did something to my computer. So
No,
we see you.
We can
You
still
do?
see you.
Well, I was looking at the chats and then I went up too far and now I have a thing that says more meetings. So I don't know what I'm doing. So I'll just listen.
We're doing a great job. And we're almost out of time. So I think that that's a really great note to end on, that conscience is what drives us all. You've all mentioned it multiple times. And I think that this has just been such a powerful testament of no matter who you are or how you become Catholic or what your relationship is with going to church or however you choose to worship God, that conscience is what drives Catholics. And that's what we're taking home today. And I think that this has been just the most powerful testament of that. So thank you all. But with that, our time together today is unfortunately coming to an end. So thank you again all for being here today and showing up and being willing to learn and grow alongside fellow pro-choice Catholics. So in the next couple of days, you'll all receive a follow-up email with a recording of today's event, in addition to some great resources, including some on Catholic healthcare I'll make sure to include, and ways to take action as a pro-choice Catholic, because as we just discussed, that's something really important that each of us can and should be doing. There'll also be instructions on there on how to share your own story with Catholics for Choice if today's event left you feeling inspired to do so, as well as information on how to join our Facebook group and become part of the awesome community that we're building there. And thank you again to Mary, Judi, and Michelle for being here today and having this conversation. I'm so grateful and I feel really inspired walking away. And thank you again to all of our audience members for being part of our Catholics for Choice family. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Marley. Thanks. Bye, Mary.
Thank you.
Bye, Michelle.
I got back on. I can now see people. So I can see all you guys again.